Riverside Board of Trustees regular meeting for Thursday, August 3rd, 2017. Time is 7:02. Please call the roll.
President Sells.
Here.
Trustee Pollock.
Here.
Trustee Giza.
Here.
Trustee Lumsden.
Here.
Trustee Valerie.
Here.
Trustee Sedeby.
Here.
Trustee Peters.
Here.
Village Manager Francis.
Here.
Village Attorney Mars.
Here.
Also present Village Clerk Davis.
With your indulgence for just a second, I saw that Mr. Normati just walked in. Mr. Mars, would it be appropriate if he had something to say for him to say it during our regular meeting, or should he come back?
He can. If he wants to give official testimony, though, he should definitely come back. It won't be part of the public hearing if he says anything tonight. So.
Mr. Normati, what's going on here is we were supposed, when we posted the public hearing, it should have stipulated that it was at a date and time certain. We didn't do that. So we just continued that public hearing until August 17th. If you're here and you wanted to address us this evening, you can do it. If you would like, during our regular meeting here, we'll just swear you in as if you were at the public hearing. Or if you'd prefer to wait and come back. Wait, you're saying no? I thought you said
Well, we can't swear him in to give testimony at the public hearing.
Oh, he can only be sworn in at the public hearing.
Right. So my preference would be that he came back. I mean, if he can't make it for some reason, he's free to say something to the board tonight. But
You should,
okay.
is that okay? You can make it on the 17th?
Yeah, that Thursday.
Yeah, it's a Thursday.
Yep. 2 weeks from tonight.
Okay, sure.
Okay, I'm sorry. Thanks for coming. Now we can rise for the pledge.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We're like a Swiss train around here. If you're not there at the time, we just move on. So I feel bad for Mr. Normati coming, though, Dr. Normati. First up this evening are presentations and public comment. I don't see anyone here that wants to address us, so we'll just move on to the presentations. Chief Weitzel has an update for the board on the allegiance against intoxicated motorists. Chief Weitzel.
Thank you, President Sells, Trustees, Manager Francis. I just wanted to update you on some DUI awards the department officers received as of late. I would normally have those officers here, but because of the summer vacations, shift shortages, overtime, actually 2 of the 4 are working right now, and the other 2 are off, and 1 is on military leave. So I just thought that I would come and just brief the board that the Alliance Against Intoxicated Motorists awarded Officer Brian Greenewald, Officer Michael Panic, Officer Joseph Mahana, and Officer Tammy Roberson their award of Certificate of Appreciation for their aggressive DUI enforcement for the calendar year 2016-2017. I presented those awards to them in person at roll call, and it is the 5th time that Officer Greenewald has received that award. It's the first time Officer Roberson or Officer Mahana and Officer Panic have received that acknowledgement. I would also note that AIM did their annual statewide report from agencies that submit voluntarily data to AIM so they could rank departments by certain categories. And as far as per capita police officer versus population, Riverside ranked 3rd in the state of Illinois for the amount of agencies submitted. There were 128 agencies submitted. The only 2 towns in the state of Illinois that submitted for this information that were above Riverside was a small community called Southern View, Illinois, and North Pekin. They had more arrests per officer or population because the city of Southern View is under 1,000 and North Pekin is smaller than us. So out of 24 law enforcement agencies in the state, we ranked number 3rd in per capita. And as I always do, when I get these documents, I call over to the state's attorney's office and either speak to Mr. Dan Groth, who's the supervisor, or one of his assistants, and ask them what our conviction rate is so that I could publicly state that these are not just arrests. And he gave me the conviction rate presently at 88.9%. Now that's a conviction could be a plea of guilty, it could be a finding of guilty, it could even be supervision, that the state's attorney's office will track it like that. And out of that percentage, there's still another 7% of our cases are still pending that have not even gone to that level. So I'd just like the board and the trustees to know it's not just an arrest, it's to follow through the casework. And actually, I would argue that the conviction rate is probably more important. Because if I came to you and told you that we made 140 DUI arrests and 139 of them walked out the door at court, there would be a serious problem with the department. So I think that's really a more important statistic to quote you. And with that, I could take any questions, or that's really all I had to brief the board on.
Any questions for Chief Spitzel? That's
Thank you.
an amazing statistic, and a testament to you and your department. Thank you, Chief. Anyone else like to make public comment? Mr. Bailey? Mr. Uphues? No. Moving on to reports of village officers. I have no report tonight. Manager Francis?
I do not have any report this evening.
Moving on to the approval of consent agenda. Are there any items that anyone needs to be removed for discussion? Hearing none, the consent agenda is as follows: approval of the voucher list of bills for August 3, 2017, and file and review the following: the Village Board Trustee regular minutes of July 20, Economic Development Commission meeting minutes May 11, Economic Development Commission meetings June 19th, Parks and Recreation Board meeting minutes March 20th, Planning and Zoning Commission meeting minutes June 28th, and okay, that's all the meeting minutes. And then file and review the Finance Department monthly report of June and the Police Department second quarter report. Also on the consent agenda, a resolution authorizing the village manager to execute an agreement in the amount of $44,020.50 with R.W. Collins for the soil remediation at 2710 South Harlem Avenue. I'd ask for a motion and a second to approve.
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Lumsden, second by Mr. Sedeby. Please call the roll.
Trustee Powell.
Aye.
Trustee Giza.
Aye.
Trustee Lumsden.
Aye.
Trustee Ballerine. Trustee Sedeby.
Aye.
Trustee Peters.
Motion carries. Next up are ordinances and resolutions. First up, an ordinance approving a sign variation for canopy signage at 539 Long Common, the Citgo gas station, formerly known as the Marathon. Director Abt.
Yes, the owner of the former Marathon station is seeking a sign variation. He is in the midst of rebranding from Marathon to Citgo and is looking to change the existing signage that's on his freestanding canopy to Citgo signage as required by Citgo. Unfortunately, the existing signage out there is considered non-conforming signage. The B1 sign regulations do not address canopy signs. It only makes allowances for awning signs. So there is nothing in the code that would allow him to be able to continue having those signs. Obviously, the signs are existing. He's just looking to replace them. And so he is exercising this option to go through with a sign variance. According to our non-conforming sign regulations, if you have a non-conforming sign and you're going to be changing the copy of it, you have to bring it into conformance. Unfortunately, there is no way for him to bring it into conformance other than just to remove it completely. So he is exercising his option to request a sign variance. The Planning and Zoning Commission did hold their public hearing for this at their last meeting, and they did recommend approval. However, they did that with the understanding that staff was going to be looking into a text amendment that would address the canopy signage issue in the B1 district moving forward. So staff and the village attorney are working on that and hope to have a text amendment before them at their next meeting.
I'd ask for a motion to approve an ordinance approving a sign variation for the canopy signs at 539 Long Common, Citgo gas station, formerly Marathon. Motion by Mr. Pollack,
Second.
second by Mr. Sedeby. Any questions or comments?
I have one question. I've driven by that gas station a couple times. I've actually called you on that gas station a couple times. Is there any outstanding code violations with the gas station?
I believe they still are working on that. One of the things they have to do is fix the planter that's in front that's falling apart, and that is going to be part of their ground sign. So they have submitted to put up a new ground sign as well, and part of that package will be fixing that planter area in the front. And I believe there's still some painting and things that have to be done on the building, but he has indicated to our inspector that as this whole rebranding is happening, that he is going to be working through getting all of that site cleaned up.
Has he given you a date when he planned? I mean, there's roofing tiles missing, there's the gutter is broken, there's a plastic sign that has nothing on it. He's got signs on his windows that are peeling off. It's an eyesore and a gateway to our community, and he has outstanding variations on it and or violations on it. And I have a hard time approving a variation with a business that has violations.
Understood, yes. He's been working with Jose, and, he said, as he gives dates, there's always well, I need a little bit more time to work on this. Well, I've been focusing on trying to get my sign permits. So it's my understanding that, they're trying to come to some sort of agreement on kind of working on phasing the improvements. So I think right now his focus is on the ground sign and the planter in the front. And I believe a lot of the signage on the building itself is actually going to be coming down as part of this rebranding.
We don't know that.
So the sign package that they submitted for review showed that the kind of like reader board blank sign will be coming down, and there's only going to be like maybe one window sign in there.
Should we make the approval contingent on correcting the code violation? Or can you tie those two together?
Not for a variation like
Okay.
this.
Thank you.
I mean, the adjudication process is moving forward.
Yeah. Okay.
So,
We
Mr.
have a
Powell.
vehicle to get it cleaned up, right?
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes. Mr. Powell.
Would it be appropriate to consider tabling this pending a full report on the resolution of code violations? Not conditioning the approval on it, but just simply asking for a staff report of those violations and the property owner's plan to rectify them.
I would suggest that that's kind of a distinction without a difference. I mean, I understand the desire to want it to get cleaned up, but I don't think that we can tie to items that are legally distinct. I mean, the question before you is whether or not he satisfies the requirements for a variation. What you're bringing up, I think, is extraneous to that determination. Mr. Mars, what is your?
I think anything, the newer sign is gonna look better, be refreshed, and help, right?
And one would hope that with rebranding and that will also give an incentive to, make no mistake, we are pursuing the things that we all don't like, that we're seeing over there, and that will continue.
So let me try another approach.
Okay.
If this is a question for staff, if we had a property that had some outstanding zoning and building code violations, and they came in, they asked for a permit to do work unrelated to the violations, could we hold up that permit because of the violations that exist on the property?
Is that a question for me?
I guess so.
I would hesitate to do that as well.
Okay, I can't think of anything else.
I think we've made our point.
We did make that point.
I'll make a motion to support our fellow colleagues and make a motion to approve this.
This is from Mr. Lumsden,
I'll second it.
seconded by Ms. Peters. Please call the roll.
Trustee Pollock.
Aye.
Trustee Giza. Trustee Lumsden.
Aye.
Trustee Valerie.
No?
Trustee Sedovey. Trustee Peters.
Motion carries.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Mars, next up is this motion to approve business district. Do we get a motion, a second, and then table?
No, so jumping back to what we said earlier, it wasn't any problem with the published notice. What it is there's an archaic statutory requirement that says we have to actually pass an ordinance setting a date and time for a public hearing. So that is what this ordinance does, is it says
I
we're gonna
see.
hold this public hearing on the 17th. So we do need to approve this tonight.
Okay, so this basically does what we said we wanted to do before?
Yes.
Okay. So I think that's pretty self-explanatory. So I'd ask for a motion to approve an ordinance proposing the imposition of a business district retailer's occupation tax and a business district service occupation tax within the boundaries of Riverside Harlan Avenue Business District Number 1. Motion by Mr. Pollak, seconded by Mr. Lumsden. That's all right. Please call the roll.
Trustee Pollak.
Aye.
Trustee Giza. Trustee Lumsden. Trustee Valerie. Trustee Sedovey. Trustee Peters.
Motion carries. And I apologize, Mr. Morris. I thought that it was the notice that was an error. Okay. So now we move on to considerations, and this begins kind of the opening salvo of our budget discussions for looking forward to 2018. So tonight we're going to start with the discussion of the Village of Riverside's capital improvement plan, CIP, spanning fiscal years 2018 to 2027. Director Johns is here to present this, and I was talking with Manager Francis beforehand. Our thought is that we should focus in on 2018 for this evening. We have the department heads here. They can summarize the memoranda that you've received from the various department heads, giving you their request and their reasoning for their capital plan request for 2018. And then Director Johns can kind of lead us through that. Does that meet with everybody's satisfaction? Okay. Director Johns.
We have the village's 10-year capital improvement plan in front of us. This plan is designed to align capital projects with short-term and long-term goals, prioritize capital expenditures, and maintain the village's infrastructure and facilities. There's a total of $19,671,000 over the 10 years of this plan, with a total of $7,018,000 in 2018. In this packet that you received, an executive summary, tables by fund, fiscal year, and funding source, as well as memos from staff. Are there any questions on the executive summary portion of the plan, or would you like me to dive into the administration and finance section? Okay. There are 2 items under this section, or sorry, 3 items under the section, beginning with a feasibility study for a new Riverside Administration Center, capital and server replacement program. The computer replacement program was previously out of the operating budget, so we've just added the servers to it and moved it to the capital. And then upgrades to a new ERP software. This would be a completely new financial software package for the village. We're currently reviewing demos to upgrade our current system, which would be a much cheaper option, but we are trying to create efficiencies by utilizing technology to combine all the different software systems of the village into one comprehensive software system, or at least systems that can speak to each other.
Any questions for Director Johns or Manager Francis? I'd like to know a little bit more about the ERP. I mean, $350,000 is a lot of money. What is the justification for that in terms of the future cost benefit to the village?
The future cost benefit would be savings in staffing through attrition with our staff, trying to really diminish the amount of duplication and data entry we have in multiple systems right now, and also make reporting easier and more transparent.
So do you have a sense of how long it takes to make this worthwhile?
Well, our system is antiquated, generally speaking. We run different, multiple systems between police, fire, community development, public works, and there's no integration with these systems, so they don't speak together. So you have to log into each separate system, which means, once again, user licenses, and can actually bog down efficiencies. So some of it will be just enhanced customer service to residents from one component, and then also starting to gather analytics for us to better manage different departments within the village as a whole. Regardless, the system will need to be updated. It's something that we've talked on an ongoing basis in the CIP, and we've deferred several times since I've started with the village in 2012. Upgrading the existing software would make the most sense if it's compatible with what we need for our other existing non-legacy systems that we'll continue to use thereafter. The importance of here is getting something that's cloud-based, something that staff, whether it's the police department, fire department, community development, or public works, can access remotely versus having to call somebody that's in the office at a workstation. There are certain capabilities that we just don't have currently. So moving toward that and then gaining efficiencies in that respect is key. So with regard to an exact timeline, it's really hard to provide because once again, it's getting this, first of all, selecting a system, which will take a lengthy period of time. But if the board says at this point in time that they're willing to authorize it for 2018, then staff would begin to move forward more on this particular project. Right now, they're just evaluating some potential options. Perfect example of this is our payroll system. We have our deputy chief that spends a lengthy period of time entering in, going through timesheets. Same thing with our fire chief and other departments where it's a lot of hand entry into certain things or cross-checking, whereas if you had a timekeeping system that needs nicely integrated into a financial software, you've just gained efficiencies. And so the potential for error has diminished while also freeing up the time for your administrative staff of a higher level to do other things. So there are certain things, the intangibles, obviously over time and as we go through this process, we'll be able to better benchmark as to what our estimated savings will be, but at this point in time, it's in its infancy at this point, but it needs to be done because, for example, there are communities that allow their residents access to their water billing accounts where they can log into a system, view their consumption, and see what's happening over previous years to note that perhaps they may have a leak, versus the village notifying them they may be able to see it in advance. So there are certain technological changes that we're not able to take advantage of because we have an antiquated software. So it's not only that there will be savings for us, there could be potential savings for a resident as well.
So those kind of potentialities would be included in this number?
We would, yes.
And would the, correct me if I'm wrong, but wouldn't the software company that we were potentially purchases from provide a return on investment and show a flow chart of where the savings would occur?
I have not seen that from any of the software vendors that I've looked at.
Have you asked or they provide any type of a PowerPoint presentation on it?
Not on return on investment, not yet.
You may want to ask because historically speaking, when I license certain softwares, I ask for it and then they include it. It's good to put that on them and then we would be able to go back and analyze their work.
Does that sound good?
I would certainly like to see more detail on the cost benefit to even consider an expenditure of this magnitude.
Mr. Pollard?
A few questions just for edification. Is ERP the brand name? Is it, what is
No,
that?
it's an acronym.
What's it an acronym for?
For enterprise, I'm drawing a blank on.
Well, that's okay.
It's essentially an all-encompassing software for a village's related needs. So it incorporates community development, finance, permitting, etc.
So are you upgrading the existing software, or are you going to go out and seek a whole new package?
In a perfect world, and ideally, we'd like to look to upgrade our existing software if they can incorporate everything that we need. We don't want to continue to have these inefficiencies. So either they need to be able to create bridges between softwares that aren't legacy softwares that we'll continue to use so that there's communication between the two. Otherwise, we may have to look at other alternatives.
So the final question, I think. So this is village-wide. So I assume, it says planning and development, or building and recreation. Water billing, I assume. Did you consider, or is there any merit to having some of this funding come from the water fund, since it's benefiting in part the water fund?
We can distribute part of the expense to the water fund. There's
Or other enterprise funds?
right. So you'll also notice, for example, Parks and Rec has their own assignment under the fund balance. Consideration for that, because this would also integrate that software. creating certain efficiencies, so.
So the 350 would either, to Trustee Pollock's point, the 350 would either cover the upgrades, or if they're not able to upgrade the legacy software, it would cover a new system.
Right.
Correct.
Hopefully, it would be significantly less if it were just an upgrade in our existing. So this is just to purchase the upgrade. We would still have ongoing annual licenses, which we're paying currently for our legacy software, which vary, I believe it's around 28 to 30,000 that we pay for those user license on an annual basis and for support.
I mean, I'd certainly like to see, what Trustee Giza and Sedovy mentioned, but I also like very much the idea that we can increase the communication capabilities of our residents further on accounts. I think that would be a nice addition.
And maintenance is included in the annual user fee, license fees?
So, right,
Yeah, that's
right. So, but that's separate and distinct from the purchase of an update to the financial.
There's no additional maintenance fees in addition to that.
We don't know because we haven't costed it out yet, so.
So yeah, so if you could get some of the additional information for the trustees at the next
Absolutely.
board, we can revisit this then,
Okay.
next time we talk about it. Because obviously, we're not making final decisions tonight, we're just getting the lay of the land. Anything else on administration and finance, trustees? No? Okay, let's move on to community development. Director Adams. You know what, maybe a more efficient way of doing this is, instead of having her go through everything.
Right.
Are there just questions that you have in terms of the items that you see before you that you would like more information about? Because these are all relatively small ticket items.
Well, the first item, the tracking program software, wouldn't that be covered under the last item we were just talking about? Wouldn't that be part of that whole upgrade?
It may or may not be.
It may or may not be. So if we just upgrade our existing system, there might not be able to be, the entire new system would possibly be as much as 400,000. That's why there's an allocation under community development and under parks and recreation.
Okay, that's kind of where I was getting at. So this number keeps creeping up. Yes.
A little bit.
And we've had no takers on the facade improvement program.
At this point, no. I've had several people express interest again, but nobody has actually completed and filled out an application. So hopefully, I just had one other business on Quincy Street come in and ask about it. So, hopefully they'll start coming in again and start pounding the pavement a little bit and see if I can rustle up some interest to at least get an application in this fall, this summer, fall. They may or depending on what the project is, may or may not be able to get it completed within this fiscal year. So I think it's been a little bit difficult this year. My understanding is from the people, I came before you to try to amend the program, is that there's been some difficulty finding contractors that are interested in these smaller jobs or being able to make time for these smaller jobs, which is one of the reasons I wanted to go down to just being able to provide one quote. So at least they could find one person that was interested in the job, they could come in and get the grant, so.
But where does the $30,000 number come from? I mean, if we haven't had any interest and they're small amounts anyway.
True enough.
I mean, is there?
30,000 was what I came up with for the last fiscal year, looking at some of the other caps that other communities had put on businesses, and so I was kind of following what some other communities had done. So with a $5,000 cap or a $10,000 lifetime cap, came up with $30,000 if we had, 3 people with larger projects that came in. If somebody had another restaurant build out that wanted to come in, that perhaps,
But our cap's 5,000, right?
It's, 5,000 for a year, 10,000 for a lifetime max.
I
So,
would be interested in reducing this,
If the
perhaps.
project's already been started, can someone do it retroactively or not?
no, the way it's written is it has to get approved prior to starting the work. So if any work has already started, it would not be able to cover that work, but any new work that hasn't been started at, they could just hold off and apply for that additional work. Say they did some facade improvements, we're still planning on doing some signage, they could then at least come in for the signage if they haven't done that yet.
Okay.
That kind of thing. If they've done some other work, they need to do some tuck pointing or, something like that, they could come in and get that for those improvements.
I guess where I'm going with this is, I mean, you all see the totals, you all see where we are, both with this year and future years. It seems to me, if $10,000 here, $10,000 there, we're getting to the point where that matters, you know, significantly more than maybe it did in past years. So, I mean, I'm fine if you want to leave it at 30. I would tend, given the lack of interest in it, to maybe reduce it. But what do you think?
I would agree. I personally would eliminate it, but.
You would zero it out?
I'd zero it out, but that's.
No, we can zero it out of the program, and we could fund it. I hate to have a program out there that we all
Yeah, it's
spoke
quite,
highly
no,
of,
we
and
can't have a
EDC
program.
came to us and wanted to have around, and then we don't have any way to pay for it if somebody comes in the door.
Well, I mean, you could pay for it, we could do a budget amendment, but it seems kind of silly to have a standing program and not be willing to fund it. But to Trustee Valerine's point, is if we're not getting any takers.
If we haven't got any takers, and if the reality is that some of the improvements that are gonna be done might be something as small as just some signage improvements, which is what I think CMAP had originally kind of thought of trying to do, just a sign grant program versus a whole facade program. You know, if this is kind of where we wanna try and focus in and work on some sign improvements, maybe we could, you know, bring it down to like 15,000, something in that range. I think you're looking at, you know, probably like $1,000 for a larger signage, piece of signage. If it's something smaller, it might be in the mid, you know, like $500 or $600 for like maybe a smaller sign. A window sign is obviously going to be a lot less expensive versus a wall sign or a blade sign, or putting in a new awning with signage on it. That's going to be a little bit more expensive. So, I mean, the possibility of maybe bringing it down to like 15,000, give that opportunity if somebody wants to do something a little bit bigger, that there is some wiggle room, that if there are a couple other smaller projects that come in.
But my understanding always of the facade program really was for existing businesses. I mean, if we have somebody new come in and they're asking for incentives, I mean, that's going to be something we're going to be considering separate and apart anyway. So I always imagined, I mean, I really always thought of this in terms of let's get rid of the box signs. You know, come on, folks,
Right.
we're giving you the opportunity here. We're begging you to get rid of these signs,
Yeah.
and nobody's doing it. So if that's really the intent, then I think we should tailor it financially to that intent.
I'm a little hesitant to take it out completely, because I do think it's part of the incentive packages. We've been building up over the last several years this kind of new welcoming and encouraging of our businesses. And I would hate for the message to get out that since the very first year it was offered, no one took us up on it, we just took it away. But I do agree with reducing the amount, and if we're okay as a board with going through the motion practice like you talked about, if someone does come to us, then I'm fine with reducing it significantly. But I think we need to make sure that that message is conveyed, that we are still very willing to help in this regard. And, you know, this is just one more piece of the puzzle that we're trying to build up there of how we want to encourage our businesses to be successful.
I think that's a really good point. So anybody want to suggest a number?
I don't necessarily have a number, but I'm wondering if we should put a sunset on this to say, okay, we're going to continue to fund this either at the current amount or a lesser amount, but this is the last year for the whole program. Maybe encourage some people to actually take advantage of it.
Yeah, maybe notify folks, let them know there is going to be a sunset. If they don't respond then it's their responsibility, you know, it's their mistake.
No, but you always have the power to sunset it.
Right.
Yeah.
You can sunset it anytime you want. You're like God if you can make the sunset anytime you want.
Just 1/6 of
reducing it, I don't see what that really does. I mean, there's criteria for spending it. If they don't meet the criteria, it doesn't get spent. So it's not like we're agreeing to spend this $30,000 no matter what. So I guess I don't see any need to really do anything with it.
I mean, my only reason to want to do it is I mean, these are projections as it is. but I would really like them to be as close to realistic numbers and not, I mean, there was a time when we were always talking about placeholders. So we had all these placeholders that never got done, and it made it look like the sky was falling because the artificially inflated numbers we had for our improvements. So I'd like to see them be as close to real. I know there's a guessing part and estimating part to it, but I don't like the placeholder idea. I think it should match what you're actually willing to spend.
Tell what would the process be then? Say we lower it to 10,000 and 3 people come forward and there's 15,000 requests. What do we do? How do we fund that extra 5,000?
Well, it's $5,000 a year, so we'd be fine with $15,000.
But to his points, what if we lower it and then we get more than we asked for?
Right,
I mean,
well,
you can
I
always
think
do
if
it.
I apologize. From my perspective with administering it and how the program is written, you know, we know what our budgeted allotment is. And so given our budget and the requests before that we prioritize what we're going to recommend. And so if we get 3 in at the same time, then it's going to be a merit-based system on where we're going to get the most bang for our buck, and maybe one person doesn't get the grant. If something comes in that would be that, you know, be that much money.
So the criteria, if the criteria is if a business comes into this to get this, we would assume that he would be clear of any code violations, like we discussed earlier.
Correct.
So he wouldn't be able to take advantage of a facade program if he has outstanding issues. Am I correct?
Correct, unless it's like a non-conforming sign. So if it's being used to bring that non-conformity into conformance, then that would be allowed. But if they're like, say their parking lot is not in conformance and they need to fix up their parking lot, they couldn't get the grant to, you know, put up a new sign or to put in new windows or canopies or something like that.
I'll throw a number, cut it in half.
15?
15. So it's still alive.
What do you think? Do I see nods of heads?
Fine.
I'm
Okay.
fine with that.
Anything else under community development?
Just one
Yes,
other item.
please.
Under gateway signage and landscaping, I note that the EDC is not in favor of the monument sign, and I agree with that. Is that number reflective of the possibility of not having a monument sign?
Yes, so that number is reflective of trying to estimate how much it would cost to hire somebody to design some sort of entryway feature, and then the installation of that entryway feature, whether it be landscaping, maybe some lighting or some sort of hardscaping, to try to kind of create a sense of place in that area versus going the route of the monument that was originally proposed, I think, back in 2012, is that right, Trustee Peters? So, yeah.
So you're saying that they want to take down that sign that's there?
No. So what we have
That
out
water
there
tower
right-
thing?
No,
No.
that's not.
The 2 pillars that are already there would remain.
Okay.
The design that had been proposed or kind of won a competition incorporated sort of a monument wall that would go around those and would have a sign on it that would say like "Welcome Riverside"
Okay, that's
on
I
it.
got
So,
it. Okay,
yeah.
perfect, thank you.
And I think at our next meeting, are they going to have their recommendations for the white wayfinding signage?
I think we're looking for September, so
September.
Preservation is going to be looking at it. And
So
then-
you're going to have a chance to talk about this in terms of the designs and where and what extent, so.
And that's
you're-
more for the signage portion of it. We don't really have a design or an idea yet for the actual kind of like entryway feature.
I think what's there is nice, if we just had some lighting on it, a little landscaping, I think that's all we need. But that's a conversation we can have.
But that's a
when-
conversation to-
When EDC comes before us.
Does this number include other gateway signs?
No,
We
the
talked-
gateway signage is all in the current budget for
Okay.
2017.
Okay.
I didn't include any additional gateway signage in this particular
And
2018
does that
budget.
include other entry points?
Yes.
Okay, can you remind us where those are?
We are looking at First and Forest, Harlem and Burlington, and then we're also looking at Harlem and Long Common and Fairbank and Berry Point, so as you come over the Berry Point Bridge, and then also 26th and Des Plaines. So kind of the major entryways into.
And you might remember several years ago, Mayor Rivera and I communicated, we had those nice signs put up on Harlem, right there at Harlem and Burlington. IDOT took them down because Harlem is under IDOT jurisdiction. So it's a question of whether we could even put, I mean, if we had our own property and we could set it back, that would be a different thing. But we're going to have to go through the IDOT process if we ever want to have anything on an IDOT.
I've already reached out to them and received their application and requirements so that we can make sure that we're fitting within those
That's what they should have
parameters.
sometime in 2030. So.
What about the lighting we've talked about on Forest for the last several years over the bridge? It seemed to keep coming up, but it never gets lit.
Well, I'm actually working on it right now.
When's it
Director
gonna-
Bailey and I have been working on getting the plans together. It's been to Preservation Commission and I believe the Landscape Advisory Commission. They've made their recommendations. I've been meeting with the lighting company and selected a particular Kelvin temperature for the LED lights so that they have a nice ambery ambiance to them. And we have submitted our permits into IDOT to get their blessing because it is a bridge and apparently IDOT needs to be involved in that. And once those plans are approved, then we'll be able to either go out for bid or utilize a service that Ed found to be able to do the installation. So I am really crossing my fingers hoping that is done before the end of the year because it's in the 2017 capital budget.
Did we
We're working on it.
Did we ever see a design?
It's just they opted to go with our traditional poles. It's just gonna be chopped down to about 6 feet in height so that you don't have like 12-foot poles on top of the bridge. There's 4, so there's 2 on each side.
The proportions are much
Openings
better
for
with
them.
the shorter pole because it's up on the railing.
So you've seen it? Like somebody has.
Went to a meeting.
One more question about the signage, sorry. Is the signage for parking and some of the central business district signage, is that all in the 2017 budget?
It's all in the 2017 capital budget, so.
Okay. Anything else for Director Abt? I see you also have the CBD bicycle parking project of the 60,048. So you're not really asking for.
She's asking for 12,000.
Right, no, we
You're
would
asking
have
for
to
12,000.
expend the money up front, but then we would be able to get reimbursed from the state for the grant program, so.
And do we have a specific plan as to where things are going to go, how many racks we're going to have, all that kind of thing?
I'm in the process of narrowing down the number, trying to look and see what the spacing is that we have and what the requirements for setbacks are. So I'm trying to work on construction drawings to be able to send to IDOT for approval, and then we'll be able to go out to bid for it once we get IDOT.
I think we're going to need to see that before this is finally voted on, so that everybody can have an idea of exactly what this money is going to.
So Preservation has already looked at the bike shelter, selected a design for that, and then looking at the locations for the bike racks. Part of that was designated as part of the Burlington Streetscape program. They designated certain areas for bike racks, and then also looking at, like in front of Village Hall, Centennial, replacing some of the ones in Centennial, the older ones, by the train station, and then seeing if we can fit any
I would
in.
like the board, and especially I'd like our residents to know exactly what they're getting for this money.
Certainly.
And then the Harlem property, see what that is. Anything for you, Director? I believe it is.
That's it.
Thank you. Chief Buckley. Any questions for Chief Buckley about the ambulance? Oh, and, let's back up just a second, just to, because I was unclear on this, and I don't know if Director Johns or Director Francis or Manager Francis. Not all of this money is coming out of the general fund.
Correct.
So can you kind of give us a breakdown of what is coming from where for these various items?
Yes. There's a summary at the end of the 2018 in purple which gives you the total for the year out of the various funding sources. So far, everything that we have discussed in finance and administration and the beginning part of the community development was out of general fund, unassigned fund balance. And then where it is noted, I tried to make separate categories for grant funded and when they're coming from other funding sources. The Harlem Street property will come out of business district sales tax. Parks and Recreation will come out of Parks and Recreation assigned fund balance. And then when we get to police vehicles, a portion of that will come out of the restricted fund balance for police.
Why do police have a vehicle fund and fire doesn't? Is that
from
because of the
supervision fees, the court supervision fees
Okay, that's what
fund that
funds them.
program.
Okay.
There's a source of revenue.
Right. Okay, thank you. So now, any questions for Chief Buckley on the ambulance?
I do have a question for Chief Buckley. So our policy has been to always have a backup ambulance. Is that still necessary in your opinion?
It is. Since we received paramedics here at Riverside back in the mid-1990s, we've always kept an ambulance in reserve, so we would have one available at all times in case the frontline ambulance did sustain any mechanical problems and was going to be out of service. We would have one ready to go in its place. That was the whole premise behind keeping a reserve ambulance.
And that, and again, in your opinion, that can't be solved through shared services or help from other communities? And I guess if we have the paramedics here, they don't have a vehicle to operate. Okay.
Correct. There are other municipalities that don't have reserve ambulance, and what they'll do is they'll have their paramedics respond in another vehicle and then call another town in for their ambulance, which can take a period of time usually for them to get there. Whereas we can just switch out very quickly with our ambulance and put our paramedics in the reserve ambulance.
And I guess the other thing I'd point out to the trustees, it's actually looks like what's being proposed is our newer ambulance be retired and our 14-year-old ambulance be used as the backup, continue to be used as the backup.
And that's correct. We've had a policy in the fire department to replace a frontline ambulance approximately every 7 years. We actually thought about putting it into the CIP last year. Everything was running pretty good with it until we had a pretty substantial breakdown with the vehicle and wound up spending, basically had to rebuild the engine on the vehicle due to some major leaks in it. So after that, we decided it was time to step it up a little bit and get it back into the CIP program, even though it'll be 8 years old next year. It's a 2010 ambulance. And after looking and having our mechanic evaluate both of our ambulances, he felt that the current 2003 ambulance, which is our reserve ambulance, was in better shape than the 2010. So our plan would be to replace the 2010 and keep our 2003 in reserve.
Can I ask, was it a certain model, or, I mean, are you going to go buy the same model that, broke
no.
down?
In fact, I actually talked to one of the members from LaGrange Park Fire Department who their ambulance is getting delivered next Wednesday. They're going with Ford F550 chassis, which is a much beefier chassis. It's a bigger ambulance. And for a mechanic to work on it, it's much easier because it's like a pickup truck front end, where ours is like a van front end. The only way for them to get into the engine to work on it is to drop the whole engine out and work on it. And they actually have to lift up the ambulance to do that. So mechanically, it takes a lot more work to make any repairs on it.
So are you looking to do the Ford 550 version?
We would evaluate all of them,
Okay.
but my opinion after talking to the mechanic would be to go to that like pickup truck front end, where it's much easier to access things and work on things.
You have the room in the garage for the extra length, because that's really the only downside.
Correct, yes.
I just would want to make sure we're not buying another potential, $17,000 a year expense.
You and me both.
Yeah.
That's definitely, and for me, having a reliable and dependable vehicle, especially an ambulance, is so important. Our ambulance responds on close to 1,700 calls per year, which for a town like Riverside, that's a lot of calls. Over 4 a day, basically, is what it comes down to. I want to have a vehicle that's ready to go and able to respond quickly and safely and effectively.
Your monthly report, the amount of calls, percentage of an ambulance versus a fire truck, it's like 80, 90%, it's huge.
There was only 1 year, going back, I did some stats for the last 3.5 years. There was only 1 year back in 2014 where we had more fire calls than ambulance calls. For the majority, it's ambulance calls. 2016, we had over 1,000 ambulance calls where we only had 720 fire calls. So that there is much more need for ambulance.
Now, we had a policy at one time that we billed for ambulance calls.
We still do
that?
Yes.
So what is the revenue that, I mean, is there so to say there's no revenue stream to an ambulance is not exactly correct.
Correct. We receive an estimated it can vary from year to year based on collections, anywhere from 190,000 to 230,000, depending on the frequency of calls, depending on the level of care. So you have advanced ALS, you have BLS.
Advanced life support and basic life support.
And so those are differing levels of charges as well. In addition to that, that's why changing who we're utilizing for our paramedic billing, making sure we're getting timely payment and also reporting as well was so important. So there's varying levels, but that is partially, so basically our paramedics are partially funded by that revenue that is derived, but obviously property tax also funds our paramedics, because on an annual basis, I believe for our paramedic contract, we pay over $500,000.
No, it's around 430,000.
Okay.
So it's not self-funding, in other words. I mean, that doesn't even cover personnel expense, let alone replacement or capital building and capital.
Correct, but there is revenue that is
revenue.
derived, correct.
And then is the $230,000 number, I think that's what you said is the cost of the vehicle. I hope there's some trade-in value for a 2010?
We're definitely going to look at that and look for what the trade-in value was. I'll bring up LaGrange Parking, and I asked what they got for their trade-in today, and it was only $8,000. And I was kind of shocked when I heard that number, so we're going to look into it a little bit further. Whether we're actually going to trade it in, or there are some resale of those vehicles, some companies that actually do that, and we're going to look into that also.
And where does this every 7 years come from? Because I understand you spent a fair amount of money last year. You know, if I'm looking at spending $3,000 to $5,000 a year, and maybe I get one more year out of this. I mean, I thought we had developed some sort of program or software that kind of logged miles and maintenance costs and told us when it's time to replace it. I still don't think I've seen evidence of that in any of these.
We did look at those numbers, and I do have the hours and the miles that we keep track of. But once we got hit with the last year's number of repair costs, that sort of triggered us to start pushing this forward. We were going to try to push this off a little bit further and get a little more out of that ambulance. After our mechanic evaluated it, he's a certified emergency vehicle technician. He was the one that started recommending to us to push it forward a little bit because the repair costs are going to escalate with it.
So the 2003, is there any value to that?
Due to the age, there's probably not a lot. After I looked at the numbers, you know, like LaGrange Park got, for $8,000, even if we got $8,000 for the 2003, it would probably be more effective for us to keep it here.
And how much does it cost us to keep it?
The other day we did have to replace an alternator on it, but other than that, it's basically fuel and oil, and once in a while there is a mechanical issue that we have to address. But
do you have a sense? You know, you say that you respond to about 1,700 a year. How many times have you had to use a backup ambulance?
Well,
A lot?
because of the repairs from 2016 with this ambulance, the reserve ambulance was used a lot in 2016. The other day, when this
But that was
ambulance...
an anomaly, right, because of that we got to limit it.
Correct, but that's what our mechanic's looking at also, that these repairs are going to escalate with this ambulance and continue to get worse. As
Oh, I'm
you
not
know.
suggesting to keep the 210, I'm just wondering.
But the other day when there was an hour where both of our ambulances were broke down and our mechanic was back here working, the paramedics, the frontline ambulance broke down. He was working on it when the alternator went out on the reserve ambulance.
The concern I have being heavily reliant on mutual aid is, so for that example, I obviously see the emergency vehicles when they leave to respond to a call, and I saw our excursion leaving, and I had called Chief Buckley. I said, where are they going with their lights on? And he said, it's the medics, they're responding to a call, and they have to request mutual aid, so we're dependent upon that mutual aid. Hopefully they're not on another call, or else we become secondary, and so that's where my concern lies for what we would get for a vehicle that's not costing us very much to maintain. I would rather maintain.
Yeah, for me, it's well worth the cost to keep that vehicle and put minimal amount into it to keep it up and running, to be used as a reserve ambulance.
I guess, and maybe I'm just naive about this, I'm surprised that, I mean, they're just trucks. I find it hard to believe that F-150s break down that much.
Yeah, and
Well, they're running.
the
all
chassis,
time.
But they're not running any more than a regular
Yeah,
work
but
truck.
they're sitting out there running in a 100-degree day, just idling the whole time, so they end up getting a bunch of hours on it. I mean,
And it's
the engines are made specifically for idle run in hot weather, but that is a maintenance thing that you don't see. It's not like you're bouncing down the road all the time, right? So the mileage, in a lot of times, makes no difference on those. It's the number of hours.
correct, and that's a bigger number that we look at is the hours of that vehicle. And it is a truck, but it's also powering up what we call a mobile emergency room. The back box is basically a small emergency room where we treat and deal with the patients in the rear. So it's got its own air conditioning back there, which is powered by the chassis. All sorts of equipment back there too.
I would highly recommend doing a truck chassis over a van chassis.
Yes.
Going forward, parts are cheaper, access, like you said, is much, much easier. There's a reason why everybody's going to that.
Correct.
It's a
And what
value add.
takes a mechanic
Yeah.
8 hours to fix something might take only an hour or two.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Okay, so we're okay with this? Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Director Malchiotti, Parks and Rec. Any questions for Director Malchiotti? Copy machine or registration software, which again goes back to the larger number of the...
And here I thought I was going to be the only one with a software request.
I like your number better.
Yeah.
I'd rather put 10 people to work than 5.
It is a hard number to swallow. I mean,
Right.
400 grand is a hard number to swallow. I mean, but you're going to show us.
But you have to remember, we've had our current software since I think the last upgrade that was done was back in 2003, I believe. So, and before that, it was the nifty blue screen of tab, 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 control, alt, delete, all that fun stuff. So you have to remember that we need to make sure that we're maintaining our systems to gain efficiencies, but yes.
We just have to see that the efficiencies are there, that's all. Okay, looks like we're off the... Thanks for coming.
Thanks.
Chief Weitzel. Any questions for Chief Weitzel?
Good evening. Ron got off easy. I do want the board to know I brought my deputy chief and operations lieutenant, not as backup, just as new promotions. I want them to get used to the budget process. So I asked the manager if they could attend, and she graciously said yes. So that's why they're here tonight.
I guess the same line of questioning. So we've got 3 vehicles now in the police department. How many vehicles does the police department have?
Total?
Yes.
1, 2, 3, 4, 9. Let's see, there's 7 marked, 2 unmarked. One's the detective car, one is my car, and we have the deputy chief's car. So we just rolled down, so we had one more. We had a Ford Taurus, 2013 Ford Taurus. We just rolled that down last week to the fire department. And so that was the lieutenant's car, to use Frank Laura. So actually we had some discussions, my manager, myself, the fire chief. He needed a new car, not the fire chief, his deputy chief, because that car wasn't worth putting money into. We had a better car available. That car has now been rolled down with all the lights and sirens, and the fire department can use it as they need. It had, when we rolled it down, it had 70,400 miles on it. So I believe that Chief Buckley's going to be putting that car in his fleet, if not this week, next week. So that's one less car we have. My request is for 2 squad cars. One of them is the CSO car. It's the oldest car we have in the fleet. I want to get a pickup truck, a smaller pickup truck, like a Ford Ranger. They are coming out with a police package for that. It'll be better utilized for us to do animal calls, put stuff into the back of the traffic cones, assist the officers. So then utilizing a full-service car. If for some reason the Ford doesn't get that Ford Ranger up for the police package, and it's only a police package because it's more heavily maintained, it's not a pursuit-rated vehicle, that's not what I'm speaking of, is because it lasts longer, it has heavier shocks and dual batteries and alternators. So that would be one of the cars. One would be a patrol car, and we would, that 88,000 you see in front of you, at least half of that would come out of what the finance director spoke to you about earlier, which is the fine money. So we currently have about $86,000 in the fine. And what that fine is, it's a statute that Illinois created for law enforcement who gets a percentage of the fines from tickets. It's a very small amount. I think the last time we pulled any money out of that account,
I don't think we ever have.
I don't think we did. Because it took so long to even get it to this 86,000. And so now we have that available. So you would see that number cut. Not that it wouldn't be utilized, but that wouldn't come out of the general fund. It would come out of, or the capital fund, it would come out of the conviction money. We'll buy the cars on the state bid, and so we'd be paying basically for one of the cars out of the CIP budget. One would come out of the fine money. The roll down of my car, what I was going to ask the board to support and the manager was, I gave the deputy lieutenant's car to the fire department. They had a greater need, no question. So my car, by then, will probably have 45,000 miles, maybe 50. Not a lot for my car, but I would roll my car down to the deputy chief, and then the deputy chief would roll his car down to the lieutenant that currently doesn't have one. So we would that car would not be a trade-in. My car would just roll down, but that's facilitating the fact that we gave the fire department the 2013 Taurus we had. So yes, you know, I think we can honestly say that 2 vehicle, that 88,000 I have budgeted there includes everything. Remember, it includes the squad, state purchase, switching out the cars, all the trade-outs that go with that, the striping of the cars. So it's all encompassing. The state bids are not out yet. They typically will be out around October for squad cars. If they're in line with last year, they'll go anywhere between $27,000, $28,000 to maybe $36,000 a car. I would recommend we keep the cars for this year rolling, if the board so approves, the same vehicles. The reason is, so if I have a Chevy Tahoe I'm going to trade in, and we want to get a Ford Explorer, the equipment doesn't fit. So those prisoner cages, the light bars, all that stuff in there is designed for the vehicle in question, whether that's the Ford Explorer or whether that's the Tahoe. Now, I know some of the trustees, Ford has announced that in 2019 they plan on reintroducing the Crown Victoria to the police fleet. If they do that, I'm sure that'll be back on the state bid. So, you know, that's probably a vehicle. If typically, we'll get the Ford Explorer on the bid, the Chevy Tahoe, and the Dodge Charger, is that what that is? The Dodge Charger will be the 3 cars that appear on the state bid. So, that would be my request for the squad cars. I think we're making good use out of rolling the 1 car down to the fire department for their need, and then rolling the administrative cars down. And then actually out of the 2 cars that we purchased, the 1 will be paid for by fine money. We could pay for both cars by fine money, because if you look at this 88,000, there's probably 86,000 in that account, but we would deplete it completely. And the way that the fine money comes in, we would never replenish it. We wouldn't do it in my career here. It would be much longer than that, because it depends on how judges fine defendants in court. And I'm also a little reluctant to do what some communities did, is some village boards and some communities said, we're not going to fund squad cars in the general budget. Okay, the state of Illinois gave you this fine money. It's $5 a conviction. And you're going to fund your cars. Well, that doesn't work, because you can't, the cars have to roll over before 10 and 12 years in order to get that money to pay for the car. So it's kind of a balancing act between using that money. And I will tell the board that if you look at the statute for that money, it can be used for many things in the police. It can be used for squad cars, radios, light bars, equipment. It can be used for anything in the police vehicle that you want to do. So if someday you want to just purchase equipment for a car, as long as it's a police car, that fund can be used. It does not have to be used for the vehicle itself.
What would be the rationale for leaving any money in there? I mean, to leave $40,000 in there, why?
Well, I thought that my rationale was a little bit to do with the body cameras. So I'm deferring the body cameras. I'll explain that maybe in a minute, but if we have money left over in this account, it can be used for squad car cameras. I'm deferring the body cameras because the federal government is not mandating it now. All of our current marked cars have cameras. They're outdated. The system that they download into in order for us to produce the DVDs for the court is very antiquated. We should really be updating those squad car computers to 8 high HD. The same company that does our laptop computers that we're purchasing this year also does the cameras. I'd like to use that money, some of that money, to incorporate into buying the cameras so that the cameras for the squad cars don't have to come out of the general budget. The statute allows us to buy the equipment for the car also. Those cameras could probably run us close to, if we equipped our whole fleet and then bought the servers and the DVD, what they call a DVD robot to produce the DVDs for court purposes, it could run between $30,000 and $40,000 for the whole fleet. So if I purchased one car out of that and left $20,000 to $30,000, maybe $40,000, I was going to come back to the manager at a later time and ask if that money could be purchased to squad car cameras, because we're not purchasing body-worn cameras. So we have to have either or. We currently have the squad car cameras, which means the federal government, will basically stay away from us, because you either better have the squad car cameras or you better have the body cameras.
May I follow up? Sure. Well, what difference does it make? I mean, it seems to me it makes more sense to get the biggest buying power with the money we have. I mean, if you leave it in there, you've got to deal with the inflation and everything's going to be priced more. Whether you spend that $40,000 this year on a car or next year on body cameras, it's all going to come out the same in the end in terms of the impact on the general fund and the fine money.
You're correct. I was going to ask to use the rest of the money for next year's for the squad car cameras. You're correct. But if the bigger dollar purchase and the board wants if you want to deplete that account or almost deplete that account, then we could just about cover those cars.
I mean, doesn't it make more sense to get better buying power with present dollars?
It always does. It's just whether or not it's feasible. And right now, as it currently stands, it looks like Director Johns had put 2 vehicles under the restricted fund balance for the police vehicles. So she put the 2 $48,000 figures under that, noting what we're estimating to have correct.
So the other question I have, and you hear this from me every time we talk about vehicles. I understand, and I get that the actual patrol cars have to be these muscle cars that can do all the things that they do. But the CSO car, why can't that be a hybrid?
It can be. They don't typically make the heavy-duty hybrids that we need. If that's not what the direction we'd like to go in, is buy a showroom car for the CSO car, I would be hesitant to do that, or at least I would try to convince the manager of the board not to. If they don't have the ability to be used at that heavy duty that we would use the CSO car for every single day, 7 days a week, in my opinion, those police packages come a little bit heavier.
But do you have data to show that they, because I travel around, I see hybrids in police departments.
Yes, there are some manufacturers that make hybrid squad cars. In fact, I came to the board a couple of years ago with that data. We wanted to buy, if you remember, the hybrid SUVs, the DuPage County Forest Reserve District bought them. They were $52,000 a car, when we were getting the state bid cars for $28,000. So, if you remember, the board at that time didn't go with it. There was a report I did for the board on what at that time, the hybrid cars.
But that was a patrol car.
Yes.
I'm talking about the lighter use CSO car.
Well, so we'd have to change, because we do, right now, we do buy the patrol car for the CSO car, it's just designated. So we've not had good luck in buying these showroom cars. Now, have we done it in a long time? No. The last time we bought cars off the showroom were Dodge Diplomats. And they lasted us about 6 months. And we even tried, if the board members are here a long time, we bought diesels. If you remember that. That was a disaster too. We had a diesel squad car. But there are the manufacturers you can get the hybrid. It's hard to get the hybrid for the squads. The showroom car, you have to have something that the CSO can use for transporting dogs, equipment in there. So it'd have to be something like a Ford Escape type vehicle, at least that big, so it has some back for them to put equipment in. That's why I was leaning towards a smaller pickup truck. But, at the time of if we do the typical, at the time I come to the board in January, February to ask for permission to purchase the cars on a resolution, I will come to the board not only with the history that the trustees were talking about, the maintenance history sheet. If you want me to price out a hybrid for that car, I will come to the board with a comparison for the board at that time.
That really is the directive that we received back in 2008 when we had the green referendum. I mean, we stipulated, and then every board since then has stated that any time we are making these kind of expenditures, whether it's in building or any kind of capital expenditure, that we want to explore the sustainable green alternative, taking into account, and the analogy in my mind would be concrete or asphalt on a parking lot versus the pavers. Yeah, it costs more up front, but you get a 50-year lifespan out of it. So over time, the residents are saving money. It might not be immediate savings, but over the life of the product, we're saving money. So, I think we owe it to the residents to at least explore the possibility. And it seems to me that the technology is changing and getting better all the time.
Well,
and like I say, I
see
see
that
it. I see them. And I understand the patrol car part of it, but given the, and I don't mean lighter duty in the derogatory way, I just mean in terms of the use that the vehicle's getting. It'd be interesting to see if that's something that we could make use of.
Absolutely, I'll do the research when we prepare those agendas. History of the manager thinks I go that way. I'll come with that information.
Before you do that, does anybody else want to see that? Am I the only person who wants to see this?
I would like to see more data, period. This is my third budget here. I think the last 2 years, Trustee Ballerine kept asking for this mysterious program we have that tells us when it's time to replace a car. And we still haven't seen it. So it's the third year we've asked for this, and the third year we haven't received it. So I trust your judgment, I appreciate your judgment, but I'd like to see something objective that tells us when we...
Last year on my agenda history sheets for the purchases for our squads last year, I had Director Bailey's program attached to my agenda history sheets for those, for all the mileage, all the oil changes and all the maintenance. But I will come back, if you want it sooner than that, I will come back with that same report on my request.
I think it'd be nice to see it during the budgeting process.
The problem with that is, so right now we're targeting certain vehicles with the exclusion of fire, because we know that the ambulance needs to be replaced. but it could be that all of a sudden a vehicle comes in that absolutely needs to be replaced because all of a sudden we're seeing this trend of upward of additional expenses. And so we can provide preliminary, but obviously when it actually comes to the board for purchasing authority and approval, that could be somewhat subject to change depending on what the fleet is.
Yeah, but that's supposed to be the point of the software. I mean, the way we were sold the software to begin with was to exactly give us that data that you just articulated. If we can start to see by the data that there's an increase in maintenance requirements, that justifies replacement. I think what you're hearing is we don't want to be on autopilot. You know, we don't want to say, oh, okay, it's been 7 years. Well, therefore, you've got to replace a car. We aren't going to do that. I can see the head shaking around me. If we're going to replace the car, we need to be shown why it needs to be replaced. Objective data to show why it needs to be replaced this year. Am I right?
That's my point.
Okay. And we have been asking for this, and that's why we have this program. So let's use it, and let's see it. Mr. Collins?
Well, I agree in theory, but I know it's just like your family car. At some point, you just have to make a judgment call on what I think this car is going to cost me in the next year or two. And there's no data that.
How do you make that judgment on your car, on your family car? Because you know what you just paid the past year.
Yeah.
And you know what
I
your
suppose there are
mechanics tell
some
you.
numbers to put to it, but I don't think there's going to be a
I mean, at some point it's
definitive.
subjective.
No, but if you have data on 20 vehicles, that's different than having one family car.
I suppose you're right.
And that's the difference. And it's maybe not the benefit is in year 1, but the benefit should be year 2, 3, 4.
And that's not to say that all these vehicles don't need to be replaced. That's not what we're saying. We just want to see it. Anything else? Chief Watson?
Well, I did want the board to know that the body cameras, the state, the Illinois Training Standards Board sent out a letter to chiefs that they are no longer, because of the state budget, there are no more grants available for those. So those grants that were out there for servers, body cameras, and equipment have been zeroed out of the governor's budget. So if we go to that someday, it'll be on us.
You know, I'm glad you said that, because I wanted to brief the board on something else that Chief Weitzel has been working on now. I don't know how long, more than months. You all remember the issue with the dead zones at the high school, that we have dead zones where our police officers go in. Sometimes our police officers go in alone, and they're not able to communicate beyond the building because there are a lack of repeaters within the building. Chief Weitzel has been bending over backwards trying to get grant funding from this. And we just heard this last week that we didn't get the grant for them.
We did not.
We did not get the grant. Even though the people who were looking at it commented on how well the grant had been put together and the obvious importance and necessity of it. So we're going, Chief Weitzel and manager are going back, repackaging it and submitting it again. But this remains, in my mind, a present issue. That we have a school building that our police and fire officers go into and aren't able to communicate effectively outside that building. And Chief Weitzel is doing everything he can. But I'm getting to the point where it seems to me something needs to be done. We can't put our folks at risk. I mean, if we have an active shooter situation, God forbid, in that school, and our people can't get help, that's untenable to me. So, you know, we've been asked by 208 to go look for funding, Well, we're looking for funding, but it's not our building. The problem is the building.
It's the design of the
not
building.
our
It's
equipment.
so dense. Yeah.
This needs to fall at the feet of the 208 and their school board. I don't think this should fall on our feet. It should fall on their feet. You've done a yeoman's job trying to get a grant, but it's their building.
But I just wanted the board to know how hard Chief Wattson's been trying to close that gap. I, for one, sure appreciate it.
Thank you.
Mr. Bailey? Save the best for the last. Any questions for?
Yes, could you please reiterate to me the relationship of this building with the township and how the expenses are divvied up? Is this tuck pointing and, well, just the tuck pointing and roof? Is this all the tuck pointing and all the roof, or tuck pointing?
The village owns the area west of the main entrance doors by, I guess, deed. The village is 100% responsible for maintenance of it. So that's what this project, these proposals in here for, is the roof over the administrative village hall part and the tuck pointing of the exterior walls of the village hall. Nothing to the east of that.
And is the township doing the east side at the same time?
Pardon me?
Is the township doing the east side of the building and the east side of the roof at the same time, or are they?
Not that I know of. They have a different type of roof on the township hall. The roof on the village hall is a flat, built-up roof. They did do some tuck pointing a few years ago on the township front portion of the building. As this project moves along, I have intended to let them know, by the way, that, of course, subject to village hall approval of the project, the village intends to be tuck pointing its portion of the building. Do you think you would be interested in doing some work on the township building, because it does need it? It does need it as much or more than the village hall portion.
And I would assume if we did the whole building, that there'd be some economies of scale and the price would be reflectively less.
You would think so. The township portion is substantially more. I mean, the area that they would have to do is substantially more than the village hall part. These turrets that are, right by the police entrance, actually by the front and back entrance, those are part of the township responsibility and in, I'd say, dire need of tuck pointing. It's the township's call, of course, but from our perspective, we're looking at the condition of the village hall portion, and we think it's at that, well, it's probably beyond that point where it needs maintenance. So that's what we're proposing. Both tuck pointing, the roof is beyond its useful life, and if you're doing one, it's good to do the other, because they both need it, because then they can be tied in.
Well, I think at least the proposal should be given to the township. We should try to do this in unison if we can. It doesn't make sense to do half a building.
And I think the building needs it. The building warrants attention all the way around. Not so much the roof. I don't know that much about the roof on the township hall portion, but it's a substantially different type of roof. It's a sloped roof. It's got some kind of.
So it wouldn't be done by the same contractors, but the tuck pointing would be done by the same same contractor.
Sure.
That's where I'm getting at. Okay.
That would be great.
So,
what type of roof are you planning to put on?
A built up.
Same thing?
Yeah, probably membrane roof actually. Yeah. Built up.
A TPO or something like that would be much better life expectancy.
So are we going to get a bid for tuck pointing the whole building and then bring that to the township?
I will. I will certainly, at your suggestion or direction, I will be more outgoing to the township. That our project is just kind of getting up and rolling, but a year or so ago, I was in a company of a couple masonry specialists, restoration specialists, and that was really back when we were just thinking about proposing tuck pointing the village hall portion, and they looked at the whole building. These special binoculars, they can look up at upper levels, and they clearly it was clear to them that the township portion needed tuck pointing. The upper levels of the township building are terracotta, as opposed to I think limestone blocks on the village hall portion, and it's really lost its mortar. That's really a significant. I mean, it's bad for any masonry, especially bad, I think, for terracotta. Once you have moisture intrusion in there, it
Do you know, did you share that information with the township?
I did mention it to former township supervisor. As a matter of fact, the people that I had this tour of, I think I exchanged their information so they could talk if they wanted to. And I don't know if they did, you know, it's the township's business, so to speak, and I tried to be a little bit of a matchmaker at the time, and I'm not sure if anything really developed from that.
I think they would appreciate that. I mean, if we go to the trouble of getting the number for them and can tell them what kind of condition their section's in, they would probably appreciate that information.
And the architecture firm that we have engaged to do this is very, very sensitive to historical restoration. So that's really something that's important to me, that whatever we do will be very faithful and true to the original structure.
So yeah, when you get that information, perhaps you and I can talk, and then we can go see Supervisor Wood.
Sure.
I'd really like to see two bids, one bid doing them separately at different times and one bid doing them all at once. And I think if you bring those facts to the public, there'll be some pressure to do it all at once.
That's a good point.
We'd certainly save mobilization and scaffolding and some of that type of stuff. You do tuck pointing usually by linear foot or square foot.
Is there a cost in getting that information, or is that just part of the bid process?
Well, we'll have cost estimates and bidding documents developed for the village hall portion. It would be extra to do it for the township, but I think a good beginning discussion is to really stop and look at the condition of the masonry.
Right.
And then it should tell its own story.
Just make sure you have enough contingency in that, because when you start tuck pointing, you usually find other things. These projects can grow on you pretty quick. So,
Okay. Anything else for Director Bailey? Thank you, sir. I told you, best for last. So you see the remaining numbers for the various enterprise funds. Any questions about any of that?
President Sells?
Yes, please.
Could we go back to what you were talking about the high school, just briefly? I'm troubled by that. I want to be able to sleep at night.
I've been troubled by it for over a year.
And school starts in 12 days. What's the next step? Something needs to get done. Is there a next step? Is the school board willing to pay for part of it or all of it?
They have not to date, they have not. They've been waiting, perhaps they've been waiting to see if we had any luck on getting a grant. We can relay to them now that we didn't get the grant. I think, and I don't want to obviously put words in their mouth, I think that they are not completely convinced that it really is strictly a building problem. But that is, I mean, Chief Weitzel can recap the consultant that came out and went around. I think it was our force and also North Riverside, right, that went through the building?
Yeah, they did actually 2 walkthroughs and then reports. And there is a definite need for either a booster or what's called a repeater. And I think there's more need now than there was when we did the report, because we're going to be consolidating dispatch services to North Riverside, and we're going to have everybody on the same police frequency as we are. And I mean that because Brookfield will be migrating to our system, and they currently are on another system. So we will now have the village of Brookfield also on our radio frequency. And I do believe, at least from the police perspective, that improved communication, radio communications in there is essential. And I do know that Chief Buckley's, he can probably speak to that, his own personnel have their own issues. They have a way of doing it that we can't do. So maybe he can tell you about how they relay, but we can't do that.
But before he gets, but I guess, and because I know that District 208 will ask this question, are we sure that the issue is with the building itself and that it's not a frequency issue, or it's not, the kind of equipment we're using? I mean, Do we have a definitive answer for that?
Well, at least from a police perspective, we have, the radios we have are $7,000 a piece. If the board remembers, our entire radio system was purchased on a grant from the county, $130,000. We use the Cook County Sheriff's Police backbone to operate the police system. It is a high-end microwave system that I believe is not our point. The school, the problem really occurred, and my staff could even go into that, is when they remodeled the school. It is really well built. The walls are solid. There are dead spots in the school that it's difficult for our officers to reach the 911 center. And I think those reports back up what we said. It can differ on how many of the repeaters you might need around the school, but there's no debate that there are repeaters needed there.
Will the situation change when we have consolidated dispatch because the 911 will be a different location?
No, but what will change is that we have another community that will be broadcasting police and fire, I think, but at least police calls on our frequency. It'll give a heavier load, and now those officers, everybody, that'll be Riverside, North Riverside, Lyons, Stickney, McCook, Forest View, and I don't know if I'm missing anybody, and North Riverside itself, all on the same police, and the Brookfield Zoo, all on the same police frequency. And that load to get out to our 911 center, the radio system we have can handle that load. It's just that the only dead spots we experience are at Riverside Brookfield High School. We tested District 96 schools. We don't have any dead spots there. We have no dead spots at McNeil Professional Building, Harlan Island. We have the dead spots at the high school, and it's not because the building's bad, it's because the building's good.
Right. Chief Buckley.
And on the fire side, we experienced the same thing. And just a real quick, how these radios work on the police end, when a police officer talks in his radio, it goes to a tower. From the tower, it gets bounced back to whoever he's talking to. So that's the repeater system actually working. On the fire side, our radios talk radio to radio. We're on a VHF system. So if I key up my radio to talking to it, and one of my guys is standing across the street, it goes directly to him. It doesn't go through a repeater system. So on the fire side, what we do at RB High School, since we know if we go in that basement, we lose communications. We'll stage a firefighter on the stairwell by the basement. So if somebody in the basement has to talk out to me, they call on the radio, he'll answer them, and then repeat it back to me. So it's almost like a built-in repeater, but I have to use personnel to do that.
Because Scott and I were just saying, that's like Marine band radios. They're all line of sight. The antennas have to see one another.
Right, and they can go through buildings. If I were in here, we'd be able to get out. But in the high school, especially in the basement itself, we have a lot of difficulty. So sometimes going from one side of the school to the other.
So Trustee Pollock, to go back to your question, the only thing that I know that we can do is I can certainly reach out to President Grisham and see if we can renew this conversation because, as you say, school is coming.
Is there anything we can do on a temporary basis? I don't know how this works for you, but is there something you can have as a backup if you don't have?
Actually, the phones work pretty well from the high school. That's accurate. It's the radio. It's the building for the microwave system for the radios. But right now, the officers, if they have to, they call before they go in the building, and it doesn't happen throughout the whole building. I mean, there's plenty of the building that they can get through, but there's some dead spots that are just the basement is one of them for sure. But there are other areas, and the officers just have to keep calling, or in some cases find a spot near a window that the transmission can get out, hit the repeater, and then come back. Now, it doesn't happen all that often, but I don't think it should be happening at all.
What's the repeater cost?
Well, we're using Cook County Sheriff's repeater system, so they have them set up already. So they're not charging us for that currently. So I don't know what the repeater would cost. For us to put the repeaters in the high school, the report said it was just around $62,000. But that bid is no longer. I mean, that bid had to be 2 years ago. So it's 5% above that now. But if we got the grant, it would certainly make I did notify the superintendent that we did not get the grant, so he could notify his board. I also did notify the superintendent that we will be resubmitting the grant. And if you remember, President Sells remembers because he wrote a support letter, but this board wrote a support letter. Every police chief on our frequency and State Representative Mike Zaleski wrote a letter in support of our grant. And if you saw the email that the grant writer sent us, ours was scored very high.
It's very frustrating.
It was very frustrating. So, you know, most of the times they'll even give you, if they didn't give you the 60,000, sometimes they'll grant you half of it, 30,000. They only gave out 7 grants.
And I asked Chief Weitzel with regard to the resubmittal, do we have any idea how long it would be before we heard back from that? And we simply don't because of the...
Typically, our grant writer said that it would be 3 to 6 months through a Department of Homeland Security grant, but things are not typical down there right now. As you know, they don't have a permanent director, and the federal government is auditing the Cook County Department of Homeland Security right now, so there isn't really any timeline until that audit is completed.
Well, I have to believe that now I mean, I appreciate the efforts to get grant funding. That's obviously, you know, the first thing to do. But now we know we don't have it. This is a problem that can't wait. I would hope and trust that the school board would agree that this is something that needs to be done and would partner with us in getting this done ASAP.
I will make that outreach right away.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chiefs. All right, is there any new business? We do have need for an executive session tonight to discuss collective negotiating matters, probable imminent or pending litigation, and the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employees. So I'd ask for a motion to adjourn to executive session, not to reconvene, no final action. So moved. By Mr. Lumsden.
Second.
Second by Mr. Gisa. Call the roll, please.
Trustee Powell.
Aye.
Trustee Gisa.
Aye.
Trustee Lumsden.
Aye.
Trustee Valerie.
Aye.
Trustee Sedovich. Trustee Peters.